Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well and in good spirits. I was kind of chuckling at myself because I bought the latest iPhone with all the bells and whistles, thinking I would get movie quality videos out of it. But it turns out if you hit the reverse camera option, you get the regular camera. You don't get the benefit of all the fancy cameras. And so I might have got it for nothing. But anyways, today I want to talk about a the time I bumped heads with a priest. So I had this cousin, and he was an older cousin. He's actually my mom's cousin. And he was kind of wild, and he had a funny way of speaking, and the way he spoke sounded funny because he had shot himself in the throat. He was playing Russian roulette, and the other dude chickened out, so he shot him, and then the other dude chickened out, so he said, "Look, I'm gonna put the gun to me, pull it, and then I'm gonna blast you." And when he put it to himself, it went off, and it fucked up his throat, so he talked kind of funny, and he was pretty wild. Um, when I was younger in my 20s, I always kicked it with older people. All the homeboys were older homeboys. I kicked it with people who were fighting wars and battles in prison during the 80s. And maybe even the 70s. I just always kicked it with older vatos. And he was an older cousin. So he'd come through and scoop me up. And he would crack me up because he would talk about relatives who were less than good looking as, "Hey, that bitch is hella ugly, huh?" And I'd be like, "Damn, no one says that, but everyone thinks it." And so he was a fool like that. And at that time, if you think about, I think it's the movie The Mac, where they say, "That ninja wanted the honey. All we wanted was the money." And he was more on that level. At my age, I was a horny mofo, so I wanted the honey. And I remember he'd come down either from Reno or the Central Valley to scoop me up to go kick it. And he would have 2, 3, 24 packs in the car, bunch of other party favors. And he'd come through and scoop me up because I was down to kick it, right? And sometimes we would like pull up on some women, and he'd be like, "Hey, say ho, come here." And they would come over. And I'd be like, "Oh shit, man, we about to get with these beautiful women and kick it." And he would start spitting at them. And he would have them going like, "We're about to kick it." And then he'd come out with some shit like, "Hey man, I know a lot of farm workers. I'm gonna take you out there. You're gonna work for a little while before we kick it and make us some money to kick it." And they would be like, "Fuck you, motherfucker, I ain't no hoe." And they would go off hella mad. And I would be mad too, because I'd be like, "Oh man, you blew it. I thought we was gonna kick it with these women." And he was just on a whole different another level. And there was a big story locally where someone very prominent, their kids went on to prominent positions in state government. And he tried to kill dude, right? And he was assisted by this cousin that passed away who provided the dynamite. And so when the cousin passed away, it was mandatory I go to his funeral because he would always come through and scoop me, and we were cool. And he was funny because he'd scoop me up, and then we'd go kick it with other relatives who were like, bawling at the time. And in the morning, he'd yell for him, "Hey, hey, hey." And then the other relative would come out, "What's up, what's up?" He'd be like, "Hey, motherfucker, what's for breakfast?" And he'd be like, "Oh, you motherfucker, you woke me up for that shit. Hold on, I gotta go set up the crew and what have you, and I'll come back with some breakfast." And so the other cousin would take off and manage his business, and then come back and and we would kick it. And again, like I said, I was always a youngster kicking it with older vatos. That's always been me, kicking it with like way older vatos. You know, I'd be in my 20s and kicking it with dudes that were putting in work in the 70s and 80s and shit. And so they would share stories with me. Yeah, you know, back in this time, we were part of a doo-wop group. And we all wore brims and you know, vests, sweaters over our t-shirts, and we had this look, and we carried canes, and we sung songs. And I remember one time we went to San Diego, and we didn't have enough money to get back, but we had a gun, so we went to rob the McDonald's, and we jumped the counter, and the gun went off by accident and scared everybody. So we took off, whoopity whoop, 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 whoop. And these are the kind of stories they were sharing of, like, you know, gangster shit they would do in the 70s and 80s. And I would just soak it up as a youngster. And again, some of these stories made the news. They were big news. They're well known locally. And you know, my relatives were, if not participants, the actual architects of these events. And so the cousin that supplied the dynamite for one of these events passed away. And before he did, he would come scoop me up and we'd go kick it. And I would think we're going to get with some women. And then he would try to pimp them out. And they would be like, fuck you guys, and take off. And we wouldn't get with them. And then if we had relatives that were less than good looking, you know, no one would say it, but he would be like, hey, man, that's an ugly bitch, huh? And I'd be like, man, this guy is a fool. And so when he passed away, it was mandatory I went to his funeral. And so his funeral was held in a small town in the Central Valley. And this town actually has an OXXO market today. And the OXXO market is like a 7-Eleven of Mexico. They don't exist here in the United States. But this town was so well connected to Mexico that somebody bought all the signage and what have you from that OXXO chain and opened a OXXO store here in the Central Valley. And so he passes away and I go to the funeral. And so I walk in, I wait till the end, I'm smoking a cigarette, doing everything I can, but being in the church. And so when we go into the church, it's already packed. There's people actually standing outside the church looking in because it's pretty much packed. And so I go in, and I go in with my older cousin who was in the Navy when I was 2 years old. And the only seating is in the front row. So we're like, fuck it, you know, let's go to the front row. So we go to the front row. And where we're sitting, right in front of us, there is a grate, like an air conditioning grate. Excuse me. And, you know, I noticed that. And then the priest starts having people go through the rituals of their knees sitting down, standing up, their knees sitting down, standing up. And I'm not moving, I'm just sitting there. Because although I was raised in that faith, I was also transitioned to another faith where we don't render acts of worship to anything but God in our own personal moments. And so when everyone kneels, I don't kneel. And my OG relative is next to me. And he says, yeah, man, I ain't gonna kneel either, man. That grate will tear up my knees. I'm old, man. I ain't trying to fuck up my knees on that grate. I'm doing it for a different reason. And then the priest asked everybody to kneel again. And everybody kneeled but me and my relative, right? And the fucking priest stops the service. And he says, hey, we got two people here who refuse to participate in these acts of worship. And then he looks at us and he says, I ask you guys to kneel. And my relative looks at me and I said, I'm not kneeling. And the priest says, please kneel so we can continue with the service. And my OG relative got on his fucking knees, right? And he's on the grate. That shit's tearing up his knees. And I tell the priest, I'm not going to kneel. And the fucking priest tells the whole church, he says, we have a guy here who doesn't want to respect what we're doing and refuses to kneel. He goes, please kneel. And I tell him, look, man, I didn't come here to render acts of worship. I came here to pay respect to my cousin. And you're making it hard for me to do so by insisting I render acts of worship which are irrelevant to my cousin's passing. And he says, I'm not going to continue unless you kneel. So I say, look, man, rather than cause a scene and disrupt my cousin's service like you choose to do so, I'm going to leave. And you can continue. So I get up and I walk out the church. And I'll be honest with you, when that shit was over, every single person that came out that church told me he was wrong for doing that. He shouldn't have called you out. He was wrong for doing that. You were right to stand your ground because you weren't there to become a Catholic. You weren't there to render acts of worship. You were here for Checo. And so that felt good to hear everybody say that. And I don't feel like I was being disrespectful. I thought I was doing the right thing by my God. And so that's pretty much the story. If I sound buzzed, it's because I had a bottle and a half of some phenomenal duckhorn wine from Napa and some pumpkin curry. It's been a good night. Have a good one.